Okay, so this video lesson is all about introductions, and different parts of the essay are more easy or more difficult for different people. I know a lot of people struggle with starting an essay. And let me just start this lesson on introductions by first encouraging you, if that's you, if you struggle with introductions, to think about not drafting your essay beginning with the introduction. Oftentimes, we don't even figure out what it is that we're writing about until we get, halfway to two-thirds through the essay and sort of go, oh, well, that's kind of what I'm after. So then, once you figure out, what it is that your essay is about, you can go back and then write the introduction. I myself, I enjoy writing introductions. I think there's a whole lot of freedom in the introduction. You get to forecast the argument. You get to set the scene. There's a wide berth for creativity. And of course, that's depending on the genre. So today we're going to look at three or four different models for writing introductions, but that doesn't mean in the drafting process you have to start writing your introduction first. You can move on to the body paragraph if you want. Okay, so I've been throwing this word around a little bit in previous video lectures, and I want to return to it briefly because I think it's important we understand that the introduction guides that I'm giving you are heuristics. They're not gospel truth. They're not the only way to write introductions. They are strategies, they are models, techniques, tools, tactics, rules of thumb that can help you invent. They can help you get started. They can help you frame the argument that you're creating. And of course, they're going to be rhetorically chosen. So as I've said in the past, you have to consider the objective of the writing assignment, the situation that you're in. For example, the introduction for a scientific study is going to sound quite different than maybe an ethnography, and an ethnography is a study of a particular culture, right? So a scientific study, the conventions of the genre mostly will be detached and objective and a whole lot of passive voice. They will lay out sort of the background of the study, why it's being done, what the hypothesis was, so on and so forth. And then in an ethnography, there's sort of more room to play around with the conventions of an introduction, right? So of course, these heuristics can translate from one genre, one discipline to the next, but sometimes the situation is different and you have to modulate for that different situation. Okay, so with that in place, let's look at our first heuristic. This one's called the funnel. And this is the most common, and it's used in a variety of genres, even though sometimes they look a little different. And the basic idea here is that you move from general to specific. Okay, so the very beginning, the first couple of sentences are going to cast a very large net, right? We refer to this oftentimes as the hook, right? The ever-intimidating hook. You have to have a great hook. You got to hook your reader so they'll want to read your writing. I think that might be a little overblown, but if you want to think about it this way, maybe not the metaphor of a hook, but a net. You want to catch the reader in your net, so to speak. And that net, if you want to catch people, needs to be large. And I think that metaphor helps because it really speaks to the general nature of the beginning, right? So you start with the general idea or something that's much more macro, and then you move to the micro. And I'll go over those terms in just a second. All right, so once you begin with the bigger general aspect of your topic, then you move down. Like if you visualize a funnel, if you've ever put oil into your engine, you know that it has a large mouth, a large opening that can catch that stream. There's a lot of room for error, right? And then it narrows it down. So the narrowing down is the context. So you start with sort of this general claim, and then you take that general claim and you move it through a specific context or situation or time period, what have you. And as you narrow it down, the idea gets more and more focused. And eventually it's so focused that what comes out of the funnel is the thesis statement. So you start with this general idea, you narrow it down through the funnel, through context, and then out at the bottom pops the thesis statement, which is then directed in a steady stream throughout the rest of the essay, right? This is probably what you learned in high school or other writing classes. All right, so let me give you an example of how this might work. I'm going to use this example in the following 4 heuristics. Okay, so hopefully that will help you see how you can take the same idea, the same essay, let's say, and write 4 different introductions for that. Okay. So here's the thesis of this essay. This is what I want to get across. This is my argument, that algorithms will never accurately assess writing, and policymakers, those are people who make laws and who regulate institutions, should eschew, which means shun or do away with, replacing writing teachers with assessment software. Okay, so my argument here pretty much is, look, computers can't grade writing. Only people can. Okay, so remember, I'm using the funnel here. So I have to start with the bigger picture, something something more general that speaks to the feeling or mood with my thesis statement. So I have a list of things that I could use here. I could talk about creativity. I could talk about data obsession. I could talk about the challenge of teaching or assessing writing. So these are all bigger picture, more general concepts that overlap or deal with my thesis. So the mood or the essential elements of my thesis deal with all 3 of these things. Now I'm going to pick one of them, and I've underlined creativity. So creativity is going to be my entry point. Let's pause for a second. Remember, the thesis statement is where I want to end up. I know going into this is my argument. This is what I want to prove. Now, how can I capture a larger group of people, right? If I just go out there spouting stuff about algorithms and writing assessment, most people aren't going to care. And that depends on my audience. Let's say I'm trying to get people who aren't in the writing profession to care about this. So I'm thinking, okay, well, really, I believe this because writing takes creativity, and creativity is human. Until we develop some sort of artificial intelligence that can replicate creativity, but even replication isn't creativity, then creativity is a way that I can talk about how writing is human and how writing must be graded, assessed, and evaluated by humans for that exact reason. Okay, so I want to start with creativity, and I want to narrow that down through context to end at this thesis statement. So this is my opening sentence. Now that I've decided I want to start with creativity. Though many often refer to the human brain as a biological computer, such an analogy misrepresents the most elusive quality of human intellect, creativity. All right, so I have some elements there that are going to reappear in my thesis statement. I've already hinted at biological versus computer, and then I've inserted the essence of what it is to be a human that writes, and that hinges on creativity. So you can see creativity becomes my entry point. All right, so there's my first sentence. Now remember, in the funnel model, I need to narrow this down. I've started large with creativity. But remember, this essay, this thesis statement isn't about creativity. It's not about biology versus technology. It's about writing, right? So how do I get from the creative human brain down to writing assessment, right? So remember, I have to narrow the context. I'm focusing on writing and creativity, not creativity in general, okay? So here's my second sentence. Let's see how I narrow this down. For all the prophecies of smart technology, especially those that promise efficient grading, written language will forever evade machine evaluation. All right, so let's see how these two connect. And here's the intro funnel paragraph I have. And as I'm reading along, you can pause and think about how I'm narrowing the entry point of creativity and then using creativity as a way to talk about writing and as a way to talk about writing as a creative action that is human, which needs to be graded by a human, not by some algorithm. Okay, so here we go. Though many often refer to the human brain as a biological computer, such an analogy misrepresents the most elusive quality of human intellect, creativity. For all the prophecies of smart technology, especially those that promise efficient grading, written language will forever evade mechanistic evaluation. Granted, algorithms can measure spelling, syntax, and grammatical proficiency, but good writing, which is inherently creative, reflects more than a following of the rules. All right, so let's pause right here. So I started off with creativity, and then I narrowed it down to writing. And then I talked about how writing is creative, which connects to my first sentence, and about how, people can follow rules, but that's not what good writing is. So now I'm firmly in the context of writing, and I'm still talking about creativity, but I've also introduced the problem of grading writing with a computer. Okay, let's continue. Writing can display correct comma placement and a mixture of sentence formations. However, that doesn't make it moving. It doesn't mean that it reflects a well-constructed idea or translate impenetrable ideas in understandable ways. Good writing is human. For this reason, algorithms will never accurately assess writing, and policymakers should eschew replacing writing teachers with assessment software. Okay, now, this is obviously a rough draft introduction. There's a lot that could be polished, but I wanted to show you a rough way of how you can use the general, in this case creativity, as an entry point to the specific. So remember, I wanted to talk about the evils of algorithms grading our writing. And in order to do that, I opened it up to creativity and how creativity is human and how writing is a creative action that is inherently human. And then you can see how I funneled that down. Okay, so that is the funnel. Let's move on to heuristic number 2. This one's called the zoom in, zoom out. Now, I don't know if other people call them these. That's the name I'm giving them. So in the future, if you go to your teacher and be like, look, I'm using the zoom in, zoom out method, they might look at you like you're crazy. Okay, so that's what I call them. And it's pretty self-explanatory in the title, right? So you start with something specific and then you expand to how that really, really, really specific example overlaps with the larger thing that you're trying to prove. So in a way, it's almost the reverse funnel, except you're not opening it up so broadly, right? I wouldn't start with writing assessment to talk about human creativity necessarily. All right, so zoom in, zoom out. You want to zoom into the micro as an example of the macro. Now, if you think about micro, microscope, right, microscopic, microorganism, it is a really, 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 really small thing. The macro is the bigger picture. So let's say I was making an argument and I had a piece of evidence that sort of proves, helps prove anyway, the argument that I'm making. that could be considered the micro. So in this introduction, maybe you want to start with that micro, that smaller piece of evidence, and then expand that expand that entry point into the real thing that you want to talk about. For example, you could start with something historical. You could start with a personal anecdote. You could start with a specific instance that mirrors the main idea. You see this strategy oftentimes in like investigative journalism, print journalism. So if they are going to, let's say they're doing a piece on like CIA black ops torture in the war against terrorism, they probably wouldn't start out with, jumping right into CIA black ops and terrorism and waterboarding. They might talk about a very, very specific instance with one person at one black site and what happened, and then expand. They'd zoom out to talk about how that is an example of a larger trend, a larger problem. Okay, so that's the zoom in, zoom out method. All right, so like I said, I'm going to continue my essay introduction on writing assessment by humans instead of algorithms. Right, so I'm going to change my introduction now for the zoom in, zoom out heuristic. So maybe I would start with an anecdote about Jane Austen and how terrible she was at grammar. So if you've ever read any Jane Austen, something like Pride and Prejudice or Emma, she's a great storyteller. She was way ahead of her time. She was a woman writing in the 1700s in England, which was not common at all. However, people have sort of discovered these manuscripts that were sent to her editor, and she wasn't really great at sort of like sentence level writing, right? There are many sort of errors and mistakes. This can also be said about Shakespeare, right? So there wasn't much consistency with spelling or syntax or things of that nature. So in the zoom in, zoom out method here, I would really zoom in on the uncovering of Jane Austen's manuscripts and how, just wrought with grammatical errors they were. And then I would zoom out to talk about how this isn't necessarily a problem. Is she any less of a writer because she made grammatical mistakes in her rough drafts? Is that what writing really is? Is it all about form and correctness and style? Or is it about something bigger? Is it about her ability to be creative, right? So you can see there, I'm still using creativity. I'm still using the human creative nature of writing as an entry point, but I've zoomed in on an historical example with Jane Austen. And now I'm slowly backing off of that example to talk about how we still have this conception of writing as just following the rules, right? And then I could expand that even more to talk about how we have begun to assess writing based on algorithms that can detect whether or not a comma is in the right place or whether or not some rule has been broken. And then I can end with that thesis statement that I had earlier. So you can see that this contrasts notably with the funnel methodology. This one, instead of starting general, starts very narrow and then backs off of that to show how that narrow example is an example of the larger argument that will be made. Okay, let's move on to our next heuristic. This is the past to present or chronological heuristic, and this is useful if you're definitely doing like a cause and effect or even like a proposal. If you're trying to show some change over time, this can be really, really helpful. I'll continue using the example of writing and creativity, and I want to in this introduction show how there's been historical change in what we know about writing. And how knowing that can be useful in how we think about writing assessment today. So I might start with something way, way, way back in the past in Greek history. And there's this great dialectic by Plato called Phaedrus, and here's how I might begin. In Plato's Phaedrus, Socrates famously relates the myth of Theuth to warn against the inherent dangers of writing. When presented with the new technology, Theuth, the king, warns that it is a replacement for memory and mastery, a technology that masquerades as wisdom and knowledge. However, much has changed since then. So I would start with this really, really old example about how people thought about writing. And this old example shows that people were scared of writing. They thought about it as a way that would get rid of memory. No one would remember anything, and they would just go around with their writing and then be able to pretend as if they were wise or knowledgeable. You can make a modern sort of analogy or here to the smartphone, right? You can sort of Google anything. It doesn't necessarily make you smart. It just makes you able to type things into a search engine. Sort of the same idea. However, in this heuristic, I want to go from past to present to show how things have changed. So I've started with how the dialectic of Phaedrus talks about writing, and then I go, however much has changed. If you fast forward to the Enlightenment, people thought about writing as a great way to transmit information and knowledge over great distances, which resulted in the exponential increase of logical reasoning, philosophy, inventions, so on and so forth. Right? I could continue about how we think about writing, how it's changed historically. Then I could fast forward to writing education, maybe in the mid-20th century, and I would say in the 1950s, writing became rules-oriented. We basically taught students grammar. We turned them into little linguists that hated writing, and that this has really, really stuck with us all the way through modern times. And now we want to implement algorithms that measure correctness instead of creativity. And there I am. I'm back in my thesis about writing being a creative human action rather than something that's mechanically measured. Okay, so you can see in this one, I do start off with a specific sort of anecdote. I talk about Plato, but as I move through it, the strategy is different. I'm moving through it historically, chronologically, to show change over time as a way to accent where we are in the current moment and how that moment is historically placed as dangerous. Okay, last heuristic. I call this one posing the question. And this is helpful, I think, in academic writing, because academic writing is a conversation. You're trying to position what you're saying in a larger context of what's been said between other experts. It also helps you create the context of your own essay and show the question that you're trying to answer. So this is, I think, really reader-oriented as well. It helps your reader understand where your essay is going to go, what the specific focus of your essay is going to be, what kinds of questions are coming up in your essay, how you're going to attend to those questions, so on and so forth. Think about how a question can help guide your essay, how it can map or foreshadow. And because in a question, there are many different parts, right? So if you're asking a question, you can attend to different parts of that question to come to an answer. So a question in and of itself can foreshadow the organization of the essay. And I'm just going to end with a paragraph that poses the question, and then we'll pull back and talk about how this works. Here we go. In academic circles, policymakers have roundly celebrated the advent of smart technologies to more efficiently grade student performance. While such assessment technology could be useful in disciplines with clear, black and white answers like math, calculus, statistics, etc., disciplines that require qualitative interpretation, like writing, elude easy quantification. So, what makes good writing, and why can't it be judged by computers? Though there are many answers for this question, I believe they distill into one common truth. Computers cannot evaluate creativity. Okay, so let's pull this apart a little bit. I begin with the context. I begin sort of setting up what the conversation is. So in academic circles, people are praising technology that can easily grade things, right? If you take a math test, for example, and you just bubble in some answers on a program, or you just write the right answers, then you can immediately get your score sort of spit back to you. That's because there are sort of black and white answers to that, right? So 2 plus 2 is going to be 4. There's no necessary qualitative interpretation for that. However, in disciplines where there is qualitative interpretation, like writing, this doesn't work so well. So you can see I've set up a conversation, right? Here's what some people say. Here's what other people are saying. Here's how those two things create dissonance. And then this sort of begs the question. That's the move, right? So this group of people says this, and then this group of people says this, and their disagreement sort of begs the question blank. And the question I'm sort of posing here is, well, if it can't be easily quantified by a computer, why is that? What then makes good writing, and why can't it be judged by a computer? So let's pause right there. Earlier, I mentioned that in posing a question, you can foreshadow the construction of an essay. So I have two parts to this question. What makes good writing? So I'll have to spend some time talking about, well, how do we know what good is? According to whom is it good? What type of writing are we talking about? Are we talking about academic writing? Or is there not one definition for writing? So there's a lot of embedded questions just in that one little part. And the second part of the question, why can't it be judged by computers? So I would have to describe what I mean by that. How does a computer judge something? What is it based off of? Is it based off of a sort of a data set that either it matches up to or it doesn't? Is it using syntax software to look at how words and phrases are placed together? How does this work? What does the technology actually look like? And then after I pose the question, I've included a thesis statement, but it's really short and to the point. Right? I write, though there are many answers for this question, I believe they distill into one common truth. Okay, so many people might say really different things about this, but really they all agree on this one thing. Computers cannot evaluate creativity. It's impossible. Okay, so that's my thesis statement. Computers cannot evaluate creativity, and this will sort of undergird, this will be the lasting thread that goes all throughout my essay when I talk about, well, what is good writing? It might, attend to the rules, but it's also creative. It has to create. It doesn't replicate. Why can't it be judged by computers? Because it's creative, because it doesn't attend to rules as an algorithm would see it, right? So creativity, as it's here in my thesis statement, will pop up again and again and again throughout this essay. Okay, that's the last heuristic. Of course, these aren't the only 4 ways to write an introduction, but I think they're 4 really helpful ways to get started. So hopefully you can see that I have changed the introduction for the same essay 4 different times based on 4 different strategies, which I hope is helpful for you in trying to determine which strategy, which introduction is best for you. Okay? Please get in touch with me if something was confusing. I covered a lot of ground in this. It was a longer video, so if something is out of place, please get a hold of me. All right. Other than that, I'll see you in the next video.